The dust-laden wind carried the scent of gunpowder and desperation as Bethany Lewis stumbled into the small town of Pahrump, Nevada Territory, in the spring of 1876. Her once fine dress was tattered at the hem, her face smudged with dirt, and her eyes hollow with a grief too fresh to name. The townsfolk stared as she made her way down the main street, clutching a small valise that contained all that remained of her former life. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Bethany paused before the only establishment that seemed to offer any promise of respite, the Sagebrush Saloon. Her parched throat and empty stomach urged her forward, though propriety demanded she turn away. Propriety, however, had not saved her family's farm after her father's passing, nor had it prevented the banker from seizing their home just 3 days prior. With a deep breath, she pushed through the swinging doors. The saloon fell quiet as she entered, the piano player's fingers hovering above the keys, the card players pausing mid-deal. Bethany lifted her chin, forcing herself to appear more confident than she felt. "I require employment," she announced to the bartender, a portly man with a thick mustache who regarded her with skeptical eyes. "This ain't no place for a lady," he responded gruffly, wiping a glass with a dubiously clean rag. "I can clean, I can cook, I can—" she faltered, uncertain what other skills might be marketable in a town like Pahrump. A voice came from behind her, deep and steady. "She can have something to eat first, Hank. Put it on my tab." Bethany turned to face the speaker. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. The dust of the trail clung to his clothing, but there was something in his stance that spoke of quiet authority. His eyes, remarkably blue against his sun-darkened skin, assessed her with neither judgment nor pity. "I don't accept charity," Bethany replied, though her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Then consider it a loan. You can work it off," the bartender shrugged. "If Flynn Jameson's vouching for you, that's good enough, but I ain't hiring, miss." Flynn Jameson. The name settled in her mind as the stranger gestured toward a corner table. After a moment's hesitation, Bethany followed him, acutely aware of the curious glances from the saloon's patrons. "You're new to Pahrump," he observed as they sat. "I arrived today." "Family?" "None." The word caught in her throat. "Not anymore." Flynn studied her face. "Where are you staying?" Bethany glanced down at her hands, noting the dirt beneath her fingernails and the absence of her mother's gold wedding band sold weeks ago for food. "I haven't decided." A serving girl placed a bowl of stew before her, along with a chunk of bread and a cup of coffee. The aroma made Bethany's mouth water, but she hesitated. "Eat," Flynn encouraged. "We can talk after." She didn't need to be told twice. As she ate, Flynn leaned back in his chair, occasionally nodding to fellow patrons, but remaining focused primarily on her. When she had finished, he leaned forward. "What brought you to Pahrump? It's not exactly on the way to anywhere." Bethany took a deep breath. "Our farm failed after my father died. The bank foreclosed. I had enough money for a stagecoach ticket, and this was as far as it would take me." She met his gaze directly. "I need work, Mr. Jameson. I'm not afraid of long hours or hard labor." "What skills do you have?" "I can read and write. I can keep accounts. I can sew and cook. I worked alongside my father on our farm since I was a child." Pride straightened her spine. "I'm not helpless, just temporarily without resources." Flynn nodded thoughtfully. "The town's growing. The silver mine up in the hills has brought in new folks. Mrs. Patterson at the general store mentioned needing help." He paused. "But that still leaves the question of where you'll stay tonight." Bethany swallowed hard. The reality of her situation pressed down on her once more. "I have some money left. Perhaps there's a boarding house? Full up with miners, the hotel too. Then I'll find a place outside town. I can—" "This country isn't kind to those without shelter, Miss Lewis. Nights get cold, and there are predators of both the four-legged and two-legged variety." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I have nowhere," she whispered, the admission painful in its starkness. Flynn's expression softened. Then you have me. He held up a hand as she began to protest. I own a ranch about 3 miles out of town. There's a small cabin near the main house it was for the foreman, but he moved on last month. You'd have privacy and safety until you find your footing. Suspicion flared. And what would you expect in return, Mr. Jameson? His eyes widened slightly before understanding dawned. Nothing improper, Miss Lewis. My offer comes with no strings. You need shelter. I have it to spare. That's all. Bethany wanted to believe him. There was something in his direct gaze that inspired trust, but experience had taught her caution. Why would you help a stranger? Flynn was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Because 7 years ago, I rode into this town with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. Someone showed me kindness then. Seems only right to pass it along. The sincerity in his voice chipped away at her defenses. I would insist on working for my keep. A smile spread across his face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. I've got 1,000 acres, Miss Lewis. There's always work to be done. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Flynn loaded Bethany's meager belongings into his wagon. The journey to his ranch passed mostly in silence, with Bethany taking in the stark beauty of the Nevada landscape. The vast open spaces both terrified and exhilarated her after a lifetime in the more confined farmlands of Illinois. The rocking J Ranch spread out before them as they crested a small rise. A well-built 2-story house stood proudly against the backdrop of distant mountains, with several outbuildings and corrals arranged nearby. A creek wound its way through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods that offered welcome shade. It's beautiful, Bethany murmured, genuinely impressed. Flynn's expression held pride as he guided the wagon toward the main house. Started with just 50 acres, worked hard, got lucky with some investments, and here we are. He pointed to a small cabin set a respectful distance from the main house. That'll be yours if it suits. The cabin was simple but sturdy, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A curtained-off area revealed a washstand and chamber pot. It was humble but clean, and the windows allowed for both light and cross-ventilation. It's perfect, Bethany said, running her hand along the smooth plank wall. Thank you, Mr. Jameson. Flynn, he corrected. If you're going to be living on my property, we might as well dispense with formalities. Bethany, she offered in return. He nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. I'll leave you to settle in. There's food in the main house when you're ready. My housekeeper, Mrs. Donovan, comes in daily to cook and clean. She'll be happy for the company been trying to convince me to hire a female ranch hand for years. Says the place needs a woman's touch. His eyes twinkled. Fair warning. She'll talk your ear off if you let her. After Flynn left, Bethany sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She had arrived in Pahrump that morning with no plan beyond survival, and now found herself housed on a prosperous ranch under the protection of a man she barely knew. It seemed too fortunate to be trusted, yet she could detect no ulterior motive in Flynn Jameson's offer. She unpacked her few possessions, arranging them carefully in the small space. Among them was a faded daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, her father standing proud in his best suit, her mother's smile shy but hopeful. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she placed the image on the small table beside the bed. I'll make you proud, she whispered to their faces. I'll find my way. As promised, Mrs. Donovan proved to be a font of information over dinner that evening. The older woman bustled around the kitchen, piling Flynn's plate high with beef stew and cornbread, while simultaneously interrogating Bethany about her journey to Pahrump. It's about time this place had a feminine presence, she declared, her Irish accent becoming more pronounced with her enthusiasm. Been telling Mr. Jameson for years he needs to find himself a wife, but the man's more married to this land than anything else. Mrs. Donovan, Flynn warned good-naturedly, Miss Lewis is an employee, not a potential bride. Let's not frighten her off before she's even unpacked. Bethany felt her cheeks warm. I'm grateful for the position. I promise I won't disappoint. Flynn's gaze met hers across the table. I have no doubt of that. The next morning, Bethany rose with the sun, determined to prove her worth. She dressed in her most practical clothing, a simple skirt and blouse that had seen better days, and made her way to the main house. To her surprise, Flynn was already at the kitchen table, studying what appeared to be ledgers while nursing a cup of coffee. Good morning, she ventured, suddenly uncertain of her role. He looked up, seeming momentarily startled by her presence, before his face relaxed into a smile. Good morning. Coffee's fresh if you'd like some. Bethany poured herself a cup, then stood awkwardly, waiting for instruction. Flynn closed the ledger. I thought today I might show you around the property, give you a better sense of the operation, unless you'd prefer to start with household duties. I'd like to see everything, she replied honestly. I want to be useful wherever I'm needed most. Something in his expression softened. That's a good attitude to have out here. Ranch life requires flexibility. After a breakfast of eggs and bacon, Flynn saddled 2 horses, leading a gentle mare to where Bethany waited. Do you ride? He asked. Yes, though it's been a while, she admitted, approaching the mare with a confident hand. The horse nickered softly as Bethany stroked her nose. This is Daisy. She's steady as they come. With practiced ease that surprised even herself, Bethany mounted the horse. Flynn raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. You didn't mention you were an accomplished horsewoman. She adjusted her skirts, wishing she had trousers for riding astride. There's a lot I didn't mention, Mr. Jameson. Flynn, he reminded her, swinging up onto his own mount, a powerful black stallion that pranced eagerly beneath him. The tour of the ranch took most of the morning. Bethany listened attentively as Flynn explained the operation, cattle breeding, horse training, and the alfalfa fields irrigated by the creek. They rode past bunkhouses where the ranch hands lived, though most were out with the herds. The few they encountered tipped their hats respectfully, eyeing Bethany with undisguised curiosity. You'll meet the rest of the men at supper, Flynn explained as they rode back toward the main house. They take their meals in the cookhouse, but on Sundays, Mrs. Donovan serves a big dinner for everyone. How many hands do you employ? 12 full-time, more during roundup and branding season. Good men, most of them. Been with me for years. Bethany nodded, processing the scale of the operation. And what would you have me do? You mentioned the need for help, but we haven't discussed specifics. Flynn reined his horse to a stop, and Bethany did the same. He seemed to consider his words carefully before speaking. Truth is, Miss Lewis Bethany, I've been looking for someone to help organize the business side of things. The ranch has grown faster than my ability to manage the paperwork. You mentioned you can read, write, and keep accounts. Yes, my father insisted I receive an education. I kept the farm's books from the time I was 15. Then that's where I need you most. The ledgers are a mess. Supply orders, payroll, breeding records, it's all scattered across 3 different books and half a dozen loose papers. He looked almost sheepish. I'm better with cattle than columns of figures. Relief washed over Bethany. This was work she knew, work she could do well. I would be happy to organize your accounts. Good. We'll set you up in the study. There's a desk by the window that gets good light. He paused. But I want to be clear, your duties aren't limited to bookkeeping. On a ranch, everyone pitches in where needed. There might be days when we need an extra hand with the chickens or help preserving the garden harvest. I understand. I'm not afraid of varied work. Flynn's smile returned. I'm beginning to think there's not much you are afraid of. Bethany Lewis. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were spent in Flynn's study, organizing the chaotic ledgers into a coherent system. Afternoons often found Bethany helping Mrs. Donovan with household tasks or working in the kitchen garden. She took to joining Flynn for rides across the property in the evenings, learning the boundaries of the land and the rhythms of ranch life. The first payday came as a surprise. Flynn entered the study with an envelope containing more money than Bethany had expected. This is too much, she protested, counting the bills a second time. It's the standard rate for a ranch accountant, plus room and board. His tone brooked no argument. You've earned it, Bethany. The books haven't been this organized since, well, ever. She carefully folded the money, mind racing with possibilities. With savings, she might eventually afford her own place in town, perhaps even start a small business. The thought should have brought joy, but instead, a strange hollowness settled in her chest at the idea of leaving the rocking J. As spring gave way to summer, Bethany's presence on the ranch became a fixture that no one, least of all Flynn, seemed to question. She developed a routine of eating breakfast with Flynn, working in the study until midday, then turning to whatever tasks required attention in the afternoon. Evenings were often spent on the porch, where Flynn would sometimes read aloud from one of the books in his surprisingly extensive library while Bethany mended clothing or simply enjoyed the cool evening air. It was during one such evening in late June that Flynn received news that would disrupt their comfortable arrangement. A rider arrived as the sun was setting, bearing a letter from Flynn's sister in San Francisco. "Eleanor's husband has passed," Flynn explained after reading the missive. "Typhoid." His brow furrowed with concern. "She has 3 young children and needs help settling affairs." "You'll go to her," Bethany said. It wasn't a question. Flynn nodded, his expression troubled. "I'll need to leave tomorrow. The journey will take at least a week, and I may need to stay for some time." "Of course, family comes first." Bethany kept her voice steady, though the prospect of Flynn's absence created an unexpected ache. "I'll leave Hank Collins in charge of the ranch operations. He's been my foreman for 4 years and knows the place almost as well as I do." Flynn hesitated. "Would you be willing to manage the accounts and correspondence while I'm gone?" "Anything requiring immediate attention can be directed to Hank, but—" "I would be honored by your trust," Bethany replied, touched that he would entrust such responsibility to her after such a short acquaintance. Flynn's departure the next morning left the ranch feeling strangely empty, despite the continued activity of the hands and Mrs. Donovan's constant presence. Bethany threw herself into her work, determined to ensure that Flynn would find everything in perfect order upon his return. The first test of her new authority came 3 days later, when a cattle buyer arrived from Carson City. Mr. Randall was clearly displeased to find himself dealing with a woman rather than Flynn. "I've always conducted business with Mr. Jameson personally," he huffed, refusing the seat Bethany offered in the study. "Perhaps I should return when he's available." "Mr. Jameson has been called away on family business," Bethany explained calmly. "He left explicit instructions regarding any pending sales." She retrieved the appropriate ledger. "You were interested in purchasing 50 head of 2-year-old steers, I believe." Randall's eyebrows rose. "That's correct. Mr. Jameson noted your previous offer of $18 per head. He's authorized me to accept 20 given the quality of this season's stock." The buyer scoffed. "That's highway robbery." Bethany's smile remained pleasant. "It's a fair market price, Mr. Randall. The Barton outfit paid $22 just last month for similar stock." This was a calculated bluff. The Bartons had actually paid $21. But Bethany had learned from Flynn that Randall and the Bartons were competitors. Randall's expression soured further. "Jameson's got no business leaving a woman to handle these matters." "Mr. Jameson left me in charge of accounts because I'm qualified," Bethany replied, steel entering her voice. "Now, shall we discuss the sale at $20 per head, or would you prefer I send word to the Bartons that you've declined the offer and they're welcome to purchase the additional stock?" The negotiations concluded with Randall agreeing to $19.50 per head, a price Bethany knew Flynn would find more than acceptable. As she recorded the sale in the ledger, a sense of pride warmed her chest. She had proven herself capable in Flynn's absence, defending his interests as if they were her own, which, she realized with a start, was exactly how she had come to think of the Rocking J, not as simply her place of employment, but as her home. And Flynn Jameson had become far more than just her employer. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Flynn's absence stretched from the expected 2 weeks to nearly a month. His letters arrived irregularly, brief but warm, detailing his sister's situation and expressing confidence in Bethany's management of affairs at the ranch. Each one she read multiple times, searching between the lines for any indication of when he might return. July brought punishing heat to the Nevada territory. The creek that fed the Rocking Jay's irrigation system ran dangerously low, forcing Bethany and the hands to implement water rationing measures. She spent long hours poring over rainfall records from previous years, trying to determine if this drought was anomalous or part of a pattern that might require long-term changes to the ranch's operations. It was during one such late night, oil lamp burning low as she reviewed weather data, that Bethany heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart leapt, then settled back into its normal rhythm as she reminded herself that riders often came and went at all hours. Still, she moved to the window, pulling aside the curtain to peer into the moonlit yard. The sight of Flynn dismounting from his weary horse sent a jolt through her system. He moved stiffly, as one does after many hours in the saddle, but there was something in the set of his shoulders that suggested more than physical fatigue. Bethany hesitated only a moment before grabbing her shawl and slipping out onto the porch. "Flynn!" He turned at the sound of her voice, his face momentarily slack with surprise before a tired smile formed. "Bethany, I didn't expect anyone to be awake at this hour." She descended the steps, crossing the yard to where he stood. "I was working on some calculations regarding the water situation. We've had to implement rationing while you were away." Flynn nodded, unsurprised. "I noticed how low the creek was running as I rode in. Smart decision." He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly uncertain. "How have things been otherwise?" "Come inside," Bethany urged. "You look exhausted." "I'll make some coffee and give you a full report." In the kitchen, as water heated on the stove, Flynn sank into a chair at the table. The lamplight revealed new lines around his eyes and a weariness that seemed bone deep. "Your sister?" Bethany asked gently. "Settled for now. I helped her sort through Howard's affairs. There were debts I wasn't aware of." He rubbed his face. "I've arranged for her and the children to move to a smaller house and left enough money to see them through the next year at least." "You're a good brother." Flynn's laugh held little humor. "I'm an absent brother who shows up in times of crisis. Eleanor deserved better." "She has better now, thanks to you." Bethany placed a cup of strong coffee before him, then sat across the table. "The ranch has fared well in your absence. Mr. Randall purchased the steers at $19.50 per head." "Randall agreed to $19.50? Flynn interrupted, genuine surprise breaking through his fatigue. "He's never gone above $18 before." Bethany allowed herself a small, proud smile. "I may have implied that the Bartons were interested in the same stock at a higher price." Flynn's laugh this time was real and warm. "Remind me never to negotiate against you." His eyes, though tired, held genuine admiration. "What else have I missed?" For the next hour, Bethany detailed the ranch's operations during his absence, the birth of 7 healthy calves, the successful breaking of 2 new horses, the repair of the north fence line after a windstorm. Flynn listened attentively, asking occasional questions, but mostly absorbing the information with evident satisfaction. "You've done more than I could have hoped," he said finally, his coffee long since finished. "The ranch is in better shape than when I left it." "Hardly that," Bethany demurred. "I simply maintained what you've built." Flynn's gaze held hers across the table. "You did far more than maintain, Bethany. You've integrated yourself into the very fabric of this place. The hands respect you. Mrs. Donovan adores you. Even Hank, who's suspicious of any change, speaks highly of your judgment." Warmth bloomed in Bethany's chest at his words. "I've come to care deeply for the Rocking Jay." "Just the ranch?" Flynn asked softly, a vulnerability in his expression that she had never seen before. The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Bethany's heart raced as she recognized the precipice they stood upon, a moment that could alter the course of both their lives. "No," she whispered, "not just the ranch." Flynn reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "When I was in San Francisco, surrounded by my sister's grief, all I could think about was getting back here, not to the ranch, Bethany, to you." The confession, simple but profound, unlocked something within her. I counted the days until your return. Each letter was read until the edges wore thin. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. I've never been a man of many words, but I need you to know this. What began as an offer of shelter has become so much more. You've brought life and light to this place, to me. Bethany turned her hand to intertwine their fingers. When I arrived in Pahrump, I had nothing, no home, no family, no future I could envision. You gave me all three. Flynn rose from his chair, still holding her hand, and came around the table. He knelt beside her chair, bringing their faces level. I don't want to be your employer anymore, Bethany. A flicker of fear passed through her. Are you asking me to leave? No, he said firmly. I'm asking you to stay, permanently, as my partner in all things. Bethany's free hand moved to his face, tracing the line of his jaw. Are you proposing, Flynn Jameson? His smile was tender. Inelegantly, yes. I love you, Bethany Lewis. I think I have since you walked into that saloon with your chin held high despite having lost everything. Tears welled in her eyes. I love you too. I've tried to be professional, to remember my place. But your place is here, Flynn interrupted, rising slightly to press his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question asked and answered, before deepening into something more urgent. Bethany's arms wound around his neck as his hands framed her face. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Is that a yes? Flynn asked, his voice husky. Bethany laughed, joy bubbling up from a place within her that had been dormant for too long. Yes. Yes, I will marry you, Flynn Jameson. The morning brought not only the news of their engagement, but the blessed sight of rain clouds gathering on the horizon. By midday, a steady downpour had transformed the parched landscape, and the creek began to rise, ensuring the ranch's water supply for the remainder of the summer. A good omen, Mrs. Donovan declared as she prepared a special supper to celebrate both Flynn's return and the engagement announcement. The ranch hands offered hearty congratulations, several admitting they had wagered on how long it would take Flynn to wise up and propose to Miss Lewis. The wedding took place in September, when the worst of the summer heat had passed and the land was touched with the first hints of autumn gold. It was a simple ceremony held on the ranch, with the local pastor officiating and the entire town of Pahrump in attendance. Bethany wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Donovan and several ranch wives had helped sew, adorned with lace sent by Flynn's sister as a wedding gift. As vows were exchanged beneath an arch of wild roses, Bethany reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived in Pahrump with nothing but desperation and determination, only to find everything she had never dared to dream of: love, purpose, community, and home. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn gathered her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership. The cheers of their friends and neighbors surrounded them, a joyful affirmation of the bond they had forged. The celebration continued well into the night, with music and dancing under the stars. As the hour grew late, Flynn led Bethany away from the festivities toward the main house, their house now, shared in every sense. "Happy, Mrs. Jameson?" he asked as they stood on the porch, the sounds of the party drifting across the yard. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe how much my life has changed since that day in the saloon." Flynn's arms tightened around her. "You said you had nowhere. I said you had me. Now we have each other, and all of this." He gestured to the ranch spread out before them, silver in the moonlight. "It's more than enough," Bethany whispered. "It's everything." The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs to the Jameson family. The Rocking J flourished under their joint stewardship, with Flynn's practical knowledge of ranching complemented by Bethany's sharp business acumen. They expanded their cattle operation, added sheep to diversify their income, and purchased adjacent land when it became available, eventually doubling the ranch's original size. Their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after Bethany's mother, arrived on a snowy December night in 1877. Mrs. Donovan, who had appointed herself unofficial grandmother, refused to leave Bethany's side throughout the long labor. Flynn paced the porch until the first cry rang out, then burst into the bedroom with such naked hope on his face that Bethany fell in love with him all over again. "She has your eyes," Flynn whispered as he cradled his daughter for the first time. "And your chin," Bethany replied, exhausted but radiant. 2 years later, twins William and Joseph joined the family, bringing with them double the joy and chaos. Flynn proved to be a devoted father, as patient and gentle with his children as he was skilled and commanding with his ranch hands. He made time each day to be with them, regardless of the demands of the ranch, teaching them to ride almost as soon as they could walk and including them in age-appropriate ranch tasks as they grew. Bethany, meanwhile, established herself as not merely Flynn's wife, but a respected businesswoman in her own right. She opened a small dry goods store in Pahrump, filling a need for the growing community and providing employment for several local women. The store operated 3 days a week, allowing her to balance her business interests with ranch responsibilities and motherhood. The town of Pahrump itself grew alongside the Jameson family. By 1885, it boasted a school, 3 churches, a hotel, and a weekly newspaper. Bethany served on the school board, while Flynn occasionally acted as an informal arbitrator in disputes between ranchers, his fair-mindedness earning him respect throughout the county. Their home expanded as well, with additions to accommodate their growing family and frequent visitors. Eleanor and her children spent summers at the ranch, the cousins forming bonds that would last a lifetime. Flynn's sister eventually remarried a kind widower from Virginia City, bringing another branch to the family tree. Life was not without its hardships. A harsh winter in 1882 decimated nearly a third of their cattle herd. A fire in 1886 destroyed one of the barns and threatened the main house before a fortuitous change in wind direction spared them worse devastation. And in 1888, Bethany suffered a miscarriage that left her bedridden for weeks, her grief a tangible presence in their home. Through each trial, however, the foundation they had built proved strong enough to weather the storm. Flynn never forgot the desperate young woman who had walked into the Sagebrush Saloon, and Bethany never forgot the man who had offered shelter when she had nowhere else to turn. Their gratitude for each other never dimmed, transforming over the years into a deep, abiding partnership that served as the cornerstone of their family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Flynn surprised Bethany with a gift that brought tears to her eyes, the deed to her family's former farm in Illinois, which he had secretly purchased and leased to a young couple starting out, much as Bethany's parents once had. "You can't rewrite the past," he told her as she cried against his shoulder, "but sometimes you can heal it a little." The gesture was typical of the man she had married, thoughtful, generous, and attuned to the wounds she carried even after all these years. They traveled east the following summer, bringing their children to see the land where Bethany had grown up. Standing in the fields her father had once planted, watching her own children run through the same meadows where she had played, Bethany felt a circle closing, a peace settling over her heart. "Thank you," she said simply, squeezing Flynn's hand. He lifted their joined hands to his lips. "Thank you for building a life with me, Bethany, for giving me a family, for making the Rocking J more than just a piece of land." As they approached their silver wedding anniversary in 1901, the landscape of both the Nevada Territory and their lives had transformed dramatically. Nevada had achieved statehood. The Transcontinental Railroad had connected the region to the rest of the country, and the discovery of silver and gold had brought waves of prospectors and settlers. Their children were grown, Margaret married to a lawyer in Carson City, William running the expanded sheep operation on the ranch, and Joseph studying medicine in San Francisco. The Rocking J itself had evolved from a cattle ranch to a diversified agricultural enterprise known throughout the region for its innovative practices and fair treatment of workers. Flynn and Bethany had instituted profit sharing for long-term employees, established a school on the property for the children of ranch families, and implemented conservation measures to preserve the natural resources of their land for future generations. On the evening of their anniversary, Flynn led Bethany to the small cabin where she had first stayed upon arriving at the ranch. Though no longer needed for housing, they had maintained it over the years as a quiet retreat. Inside, they found the table set for two, candles flickering in the gathering dusk. "Remember your first night here?" Flynn asked as he held her chair. Bethany smiled, taking in the familiar surroundings now overlaid with decades of memories. "I was terrified and trying desperately not to show it. I kept a chair propped against the door, just in case." Flynn laughed. "I suspected as much. I was trying so hard to be a gentleman that I probably came across as aloof." "Not aloof? Respectful. It was that respect that allowed me to trust you, to eventually love you." She reached across the table to take his hand, noting the new lines that time had etched into both their skins. "I've never regretted saying yes to your offer of shelter or to your proposal, nor I offering either." Flynn's eyes, still remarkably blue despite the silver that now threaded his hair, held the same warmth they had shown her that first day in the saloon. 25 years, Bethany. We've built something remarkable." "We have," she agreed, thinking not just of the ranch's success or their children's accomplishments, but of the thousands of small moments that had knit their lives together, shared laughter over breakfast, quiet conversations under the stars, the strength they had found in each other through joy and sorrow alike. "What do you think the next 25 years will bring?" Flynn asked, pouring wine into their glasses. Bethany considered the question, her mind turning to the changes already visible on the horizon, the automobile gradually replacing the horse, the telephone connecting distant communities, the new century with all its promises and uncertainties. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "The world is changing so quickly, but whatever comes, we'll face it as we always have together." Flynn raised his glass. "To us, then. To the woman who walked into Pahrump with nothing but courage, and to the man fortunate enough to recognize what a treasure he'd found." "To us," Bethany echoed, her glass touching his with a crystalline chime. "And to the words that changed our lives. I have nowhere." Flynn's smile deepened, the years falling away as he completed the exchange that had set their story in motion. "Then you have me." In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life and love, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that having Flynn Jameson, his heart, his strength, his unwavering support had always been, and would always be, more than enough.